Hello everyone and welcome to Snap Judgements. This is Glazer, and today we have a very special video for you. We are going to be introducing you to Sam Stoddard, the feature design team lead at Second Dinner. How you doing, Sam?
Oh, I'm doing great.
So, Sam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your past in game design, and your role at Second Dinner? Anything you'd like to share with the community?
So I got started actually doing like content creation and playing like in tournaments for Magic the Gathering. Did that for a
Okay.
while. Eventually managed to get a job at Wizards of the Coast, when I was there for about 7 years doing card design and product design. Eventually left there. I've been in a couple different places since. Scopely is probably the one people would have heard of before. And so I've been here at Second Dinner for about 6 months now. So my role, essentially, I'm the head of the feature design team, which is admittedly not, like two people currently, but we are, we also work with the rest of the card designers and all that fun stuff. And the basic thing that, I'm working on is working on game modes, working on other, similar type features to kind of expand what Snap is doing and just make it so that there are more fun ways to play the game.
That's awesome. Everyone loves a good special game mode. Do you have a favorite game mode that's out right now, or would it be the new one? Which is your
Uh,
favorite of these?
I do really, really like Overdrive.
Nice.
I think
That's
of the
exciting.
current game modes, I don't know if it's. I mean, I enjoy High Voltage. I think Sanctum, I really enjoyed mostly because I really enjoy the change to the scoring system and how
Hmm.
that like really forces you to reevaluate how the game plays out and like lets you play more aggressive decks than often like get right because if you can kind of like control the board for the first two or three turns, you can actually like win. Where I mean, obviously a normal snap that doesn't always help. It's always it all comes down to just whatever happens on turn six.
Were you a red player in Magic by any chance? Because that's what this sounds like.
Yeah, I would say yes. I was mostly a red mage when I played Magic, so
There you go.
I'll
The
admit that.
design philosophy carries through. So, do you play much Snap? And if so, what are your favorite decks and cards?
I mean, yeah, I play a lot of Snap. My favorite cards so Destroy was kind of the deck I played for a very very long time. Um, I still play some Destroy. I would say right now I was mostly playing a lot of Thanos, Spectrum, like ongoing stuff. Though, obviously, if I remember correctly, there was a couple nerfs that in last very recently. So I've been playing some other stuff like been playing a kind of like a Havoc, Kitty Pride, uh,
Yeah,
Bass type deck. That's been
that one
my
is.
most recent thing. And unfortunately I do not yet have Surge. So there's a couple of decks I want to play, but I gotta basically wait for her to come up somehow, and so I can start playing the other ones.
I always forget that they make you buy your own cards in the game, so you get to be like, I have them all.
So it's funny. I actually really like that. I mean,
Hmm.
it makes it different for the people who are doing still solely like game design on the card bounce stuff because they need to be
Hmm.
able to play whatever. But like as somebody who's working on features and stuff, it's a very good way of like grounding the experience and making sure that like I don't get jaded by the idea that like oh just have all the
Hmm.
cards. So what does like how many these other things don't really matter. Like things like snap packs being something that's actually meaningful for my playing experience as both a player and as someone who works there is actually really nice to make sure that like we're keeping ourselves honest on all that stuff because certainly like there are other games I've worked on where that those systems don't matter as much to you, and so it's it quickly gets to a point where you don't really appreciate like what effort people are putting into stuff, and you
Hmm.
want it to be something that like as a player you actually would enjoy engaging with, and you think is actually going to be good for you.
That makes perfect sense. And if you ever need more of that, let me just tell you, check my comment section because I guarantee that's going to be like 75% of the comments. And snap packs have been a world better. There's still
Yeah.
some complaining and like I don't want to say whining, but whining. But it's generally people who like just don't want to think. They just want to press button and see what happens as fast as possible. As I just lost my charger, excuse me. But for
Mhm.
the most part, the snap packs have gone over real well overall. So the big question, and this is going to lead into something else: are you any good at Snap?
All right. You know, that's obviously something that's hard to
Hmm.
quantify. It's like I hit infinite occasionally. I don't necessarily always do it every season. Like I think I'm pretty good. without, finish my conquest stuff. I'm certainly good enough to do all the stuff I need to in the game.
Nice.
I don't know if I could win one of the golden gauntlets or whatever, but
Since tournaments are becoming a thing in Snap, one day I'm going to harass the devs enough to get a devs versus content creators mini tournament going. That's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to bother everyone, and everyone's going to be like, but I'm good. I'm like, all right, let's play. I'm perfectly fine, but not great. All right. So can you walk us through the new game mode, High Voltage Overdrive, which you led the design of, right?
Yeah, I mean, so this is sort of part of a new philosophy that we're trying to work on where we have several game modes already, and what we've been trying to do is sort of build these as Lego bricks, with Lego bricks basically to make it so that there are things that like as we add new game modes, we can kind of like add new features and do stuff that makes it easier to sort of like mix and match stuff between game modes. The most common one for this one is, of course, that we've now been able to take the store out of Sanctum, put it in this game mode, and have a much easier way to kind of like add more content that way. But when I was designing Overdrive, basically it was looking at what game modes we had and kind of like what we could do to switch one of them up a bit and make something more fun. And when I look at High Voltage, I really enjoy High Voltage, but I think that there are some things that can happen with the game mode if we run it too frequently, or if just like there's like some certain end states where it's like we have to like worry about banning cards like Gambit because you get to this point where it's like, okay, you see so much of your deck, plus you get to do these really big plays. So it's like, do the games become very samey? And so when I was looking at designing Overdrive, the idea was like, okay, what can we do to add some new experiences that are fun, but also reduce that like sameness that can happen in some games, as well as, just keeping that like, overpowered big effect stuff going on. And the idea of, the reactor overloading and exploding and having a big effect is kind of like what came out of a couple of meetings and talking about what we think would be cool with like all the tools that we have, and so that's eventually what we ended up with. So it was this idea of like, okay, if we kind of do the Arishem type effect, add some random cards to your deck and give them a boost so they don't feel like so if you draw a Quicksilver, you don't feel that bad about it because at least it's got an extra power onto it. But that idea of like, adding those in makes it so that you can't just play the same like few combos each time in High Voltage. Now you've got to kind of really think about what's going on, what you're doing, and each game is going to ideally be more different than the last one.
So the Overdrive cards could be any card in the game. Could they be cards you already have in your deck?
Yeah, it can be cards that are already in your deck. There are we do have to. There's a ban list for Overdrive, which is a little bit, which is larger than the ban list for High Voltage, and some of the cards like we don't want everyone's deck being like a Dark Hawk, Cassandra Nova type deck because you're adding extra cards. We also have a couple of cards that were doing some weird had some weird interactions that we felt like weren't really worth making work correctly in the mode, or they caused some weird stuff. So instead we can just like ban like Mysterio as an example of a card that did some weird stuff, and so like, okay, let's just not have to worry about that one. But you can, so any card that is not banned essentially is one that you can add to your deck, so you can't actually get duplicates.
So can power still be controlled by Shang-Chi? It's the only ban I'm going to ask about.
Shang-Chi is in there. I think one of the things that's nice about getting the extra cards though is that like when there are cards that are there are cards that are very powerful in the mode, but you're not going to draw them every single game. That's the advantage of getting all those extra cards shuffled in.
I mean, even more than that, it's just if power must be controlled, he can't be banned because, like,
it's true.
Then he's a liar, and no one needs that in their life.
That is very true.
So how does draw work? Is it the same as regular High Voltage? Start with 2 a turn.
Start with 2 a turn. Yep, all that works. Okay. The core of the gameplay is very similar to High Voltage. We had to change a few things around to make it kind of fit. At first you were doing the same energy as a High Voltage each turn, and then of course you end up with like, I forget how the math works out, but because of the extra turn, it was like, okay, now you've got like, 50 energy or something. Okay, well that's too much. Like that's we don't want it to just be like nothing but 6 drops. So we ended up with changing the amount of energy from the 2 to 5 to 2 to 4, which is a kind of a meaningful change. But you also only get it. We actually added an extra turn on this mode. To allow for the reactor and those effects to have more time to kind of percolate and happen, and you don't get any new energy on that turn. So you still are getting about the same amount of energy as you would see in a high voltage game. So I think you're averaging, probably a little over 21 energy over the course of it, 21 to 28, somewhere in that range. So you're getting about that much energy over the course of the game, about that much.
Were there any ideas that you had that you abandoned along the way, or any ideas that you just think are home runs, absolutely like super fun?
Initially, we were having the reactor would always blow up after turn 3. And what we found there was that frequently there were effects that like you weren't super happy with. Also, there are a lot of effects that just don't work after turn 3, or don't work as well after turn 3 if we're setting up the game that way. So it was kind of like, can we make it so the turn happens a little more variable? And that's where we came up with the, basically, well, we already have these cards we added in, we can count those. So, and that gives you a little more, some interesting decisions when you're playing of like, for instance, if it's an effect that's really good for your deck, you might want to like not play your charge cards. So you can try to get it to happen on the third turn, because each turn, the reactor's effect does scale up. So if it's something where, this is going to be really good for my deck, I can wait off for a couple turns and try to have it happen on either the third or fourth turn. Or if it's something that's not good for your deck, you can always just try to play all your charge cards as soon as possible to try to make sure it goes off earlier in the game. We did initially try it always going off on turn 3, and we liked this change. And we also, initially, the reactor effect was not something you would know was going to happen. It would just kind of be like something is going to happen. And we definitely found with that one that we liked the fact that like people have some. We like telegraphing the effect so that people have some ability to play around it and have some like strategizing around it, which we found to be a lot more fun than just waiting until turn 3, something big random happens, and then you have to kind of like pick up the pieces from whatever that was.
Could you quickly give a couple examples of some of the different Overdrive reactor effects?
Yeah, so most of the effects are ones that, again, scale over the course of the game. There are a few actually that because some of the effects, like the biggest ones are stuff like transform all the charge cards into ones that cost more, draw some card, like, so it goes like 0, 1, 2, 3, draw like 1, 2, 3 cards, and they all cost 3, which is one, of course, you'll notice like that one would not make such sense on turn 4. So we do have a few effects that will, if you get one of the reactor effects that would not make sense to happen at the end of turn 4, at the start of turn 4, it'll actually change to a new reactor effect, and that's kind of like a subset of ones that don't scale. Like there's one that's like blow up, the 2 lowest power locations, for instance. That only happens if you get one but that only happens if you get an overdrive, a reactor effect that does not scale to turn 4, because it wouldn't make any sense, basically. But it's that there's like ones that's like move a bunch of cards, ones repeat on reveals, adding power, those kinds of things.
A lot of the community was very positive when in Sanctum the ban list changed midway throughout the event, and this seems like another really cool way to go about just showing different things we can do within different frameworks. There's no reason to be stuck with one. What was most fun about the mode? What was like your big success?
So I think with games like this, I think being able to tie a lot of stuff in with like the look and feel as well as the actual playing of it. So when we first mocked up the reactor effect and actually seeing it explode and seeing this big effect happen, I think like that to me was like getting that like putting those two things together, and suddenly you're playing the game. You get this big random effect. You get to see like the screen change and the actual board changes from the regular high voltage board to a broken board. I think like that whole effect was just really fun. And the thing that really I'd say I most enjoyed with the mode and really tied it together was when we got to the point that when you're playing it and you're really strategizing around like how you want to play your board out to try to force which turn the reactor happens, was the thing that was like, oh, this is a really cool like a cool little mini game that we can play within the game of like how much am I going to try to like guess what my opponent is going to do, what they're playing towards, and how much do I want to like try to like go against their strategy by maybe like holding off from doing all the stuff I was going to do, or maybe it's like I'm going to play these cards that are a little less good, but I do want to get this reactor kind of like essentially off the board as soon as possible, because I'm worried about it's going to impact their deck more than mine.
That's a really, really cool idea. I love that. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, you could just blow up the reactor like on turn 1 or 2 if you can, and then your
One is
opponent doesn't
hard.
get the
One is
win.
hard. It's not to say
Okay.
it's impossible.
Okay.
We had to, we obviously have built the game around the fact
Mm-hmm.
we could do it on turn 1, but like usually 2 or 3 is where you start seeing it. So that's a question of like
Okay.
how much you play towards those 2 turns will definitely impact how frequently it happens to those 2.
Were there any cards or decks that you thought seemed really extra cool in this mode or extra effective in this mode?
That's a good question. I mean, anything where one of the reactor effects actually plays into your deck is
Mm-hmm.
obviously nice. Like, for instance, having a Craven, Craven or any like move stuff. Not necessarily even just full move deck, but having the individual cards that care about something moving, because there is one of the reactor effects is, essentially like move a bunch of cards. And so, okay, well, that one happens to come up. I've got some random part of my deck that actually does benefit from it. Beyond that, I mean, I think I really like cards that have a lot of utility, because you are seeing everyone's deck sort of like has a bit more randomness in it, and so having
Mm-hmm.
anything that you can really like play at different points in the game, and maybe like whether that's like a Cosmo, Red Guardian, those kind of tech cards, I find to be
Hmm.
really interesting, because you sort of don't know what's going to happen in the game, and you have to really play around a lot more than you would in a normal game of Snap, because like your opponent could really have anything.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. They get the random cards. Yeah, that actually seems very interesting. I just had a thought. You might not have an answer for this. This is not anywhere on our notes. Is there any chance we get a tournament or something along those lines in one of the separate game modes? I think that could be a really cool change of pace somewhere down the line.
That's something that also we have not talked about. That is
Yeah,
an
it
interesting
literally
idea, though,
occurred
and
to me now.
certainly like I'm sure that like something that like some of the game modes would probably uh, tie into better than others. But like, yeah, no, that's a certainly with the whole Golden Gauntlet stuff. Certainly, that's something where I assume we could set that up. Maybe there might be a little bit of work, because the way I think the Golden Gauntlet is done is the friendly matches, which currently don't support game
Mhm.
modes. But it's an interesting idea.
All right. So you already sort of spoiled this, but in the shop we have more than just the new cards. What else can we look forward to in that shop?
I think it's a lot of stuff that we saw in the Sanctum shop. There is a portal pull in it. It does not have 3 new cards, unfortunately, but there is still a portal pull in there that has a new card and some really cool variants. Beyond that, we've got cool borders, alternate arts, credits. The kind of taking essentially very similar to what the Sanctum shop did. A lot of the same sort of like really popular items, and trying to make sure they're there.
Are the variants the same or different than the Sanctum shop?
Other different new variants.
Awesome. Very cool. Good, because I got those. All right. Can you tell us about Cobra and Kid Omega? I'd assume you're pretty happy for Kid Omega as someone who really enjoyed Destroy.
Oh yeah, I'm very happy with Kid Omega. That card is something that really, I think it does destroy in a slightly different and cool way. So it's, I think one of the, interesting things about our game is that it's very easy with a very small amount of text to really completely recontextualize something.
Mhm.
So like, looking at Kid Omega, and it's got Activate, which is something that was added like relatively recently, but the idea of like using it to activate and destroy your next card plays into some extent a bit differently than some of the other destroy cards. So it's not like it's not like Carnage, where you kind of just want to get stuff off the board. It's not like Venom, where it's all about like if you want stuff on the board and you want to like maximize it. This is one where there are different cards that sort of that work best with it. Obviously, Deadpool probably being one of the better ones, but it plays into different cards strengths with Destroy than some of the other ones. So super excited by that one. I'll admit I have not played the newer versions of Cobra, so I don't know how good that card is, or I should say I really don't know. Like I've not played that one. I can't say a lot about it. Certainly, I'm excited to see. I think both the cards are good cards. Excited to see how people play with them, how they react to them.
Our most recent tournament was won by Arisham, so seems like Cobra would be pretty solid into that matchup.
Yeah, Cobra would be very, very good against that one.
My big Kid Omega question is: are you ready for our robot or overlord Nimrod to be absolutely everywhere? Because Nimrod seems so good with Kid Omega.
Yeah, Nimrod is one of the better cards with Kid Omega. That is certainly true. I'm ready for that one. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see, obviously. But again, one of the things that's nice about it is it lets people build destroy decks in slightly different ways. I mean, we already have some versions of destroy that focus more on Nimrod, but being able to kind of like switch how things work with it, whether that's with now all of a sudden Nimrod Shuri. There's you might be able to do something cool there. You might be able to do some stuff with Forge. There's a little bit different ways of playing the deck, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that. So many of the ways to stop Nimrod are just when you play Nimrod, they have that turn that they can see it coming, that they can stop it. And if they can't see it coming to stop it, I just think it's going to be incredibly strong. I'm very excited for it. And at least I'm excited. I'm always excited for it at the start, but it needs to fall within that range of goodness, right? Like as if it's up here, then all of a sudden it's maybe I'm not excited for it. Maybe we have a problem. This is every game. But yeah, I'm pretty excited for it, at least as of now. Do you have any hints about other updated versions of classic game modes, or perhaps any other game modes in development?
I mean, can't really talk about the other stuff that is in development right now. Certainly,
so.
We are looking at other game modes. Certainly, looking at I mean, the most obvious one is Sanctum having a very different way of scoring is something we're certainly looking at, figuring out how we can incorporate that sort of technology and other things. But there are definitely other game modes in development, and some that are going to actually coming out pretty soon. But yep, those will. I'm sure we'll talk more about those in the near future when they're fully ready to go, and they're all polished and look awesome.
All right, you're not going to answer this, but if I don't say this word, my comments are just going to completely yell at me. Draft? ?
Certainly something that we've seen obviously how the Chinese version of the game does have a draft, so we've certainly seen that, and we've certainly looking at it. It is I will say it is a very hard mode to pull off correctly. Something I think that has been looked at for quite a while. I obviously can't say what if there's a version in development or if we found a version we're really happy with, but we're certainly looking at to see the Chinese version of the game, see how people are enjoying that, and see if we can learn anything from it.
Awesome, I'll take it. That's more than we had. All right. So, did you have a chance to check out any of the Golden Gauntlet tournaments? And where do you land on competitive Snap and its long-term viability?
I watched a little bit of them. Mostly, I just kind of followed to see what decks were doing well, which I do think is really exciting. I think that competitive Snap is interesting and different than the sort of Snap you see on the ladder, and I sort of appreciate that. I'm also really appreciative that there's kind of been a reward for people to really think about the metagame, think about some cool new brewed up deck and play something that's a little bit different. And I think that getting those kind of high opportunity spikes to really sort of break the metagame or come up with something new and cool and different and getting a kind of a big reward for it is a great way to to take any CCG and have ways to make sure that there's really cool way to opportunity. It's a really cool way to reward content creators or players for really coming up with the coolest deck, something new, something that really it's focused on beating whatever the current thing is. And I love that the tournaments kind of give those have that opportunity and give a way for people to actually get rewarded for that.
Yeah, I also like having something for endgame players to do, where my channel I find 3 new decks every single day, which seems insane, but Marvel Snap is infinitely variable, and new cards and OTAs come out every other second. So I've never had a problem finding at least 3 new decks a day. But now that there's this eye toward creativity and tournament grind, right? If you're just grinding ladder, it doesn't matter if you're creative, because as long as you're efficient, efficiency is all that matters.
Right.
In a tournament, we're rewarding creativity. It's a different set of rewards, and it's really, really pushing the community into some interesting directions.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm really hoping that I'm certainly looking at seeing how that's going, and hoping to see what other kind of cool decks come out of it.
Cool. All right, we're going to finish up. This is your time. What message do you have to the Marvel Snap community?
Marvel Snap is a game I love. I've played it before I started working here. I'm super proud to be working on it, and I just want to thank everyone for playing the game. I'm really hoping that people enjoy this game mode. I'm hoping that as we continue to rotate through our existing game modes and release new game modes, people just keep enjoying the game, keep playing it, keep giving us the great feedback, because anything that the feedback is something that we really appreciate as a company. Getting people to, give us their reactions helps us to just, continue to make the game more fun and keep making something that, we're going to enjoy as players, and hopefully they'll enjoy as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been our interview with Sam Stoddard, the feature design team lead of Second Dinner. We've got some great stuff to look forward to. I'm ready for High Voltage Overdrive, and hopefully you are too. Peace.